Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from Southern Oregon, right next to the mighty Rogue River. I'm here today with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group, and we've been discussing many topics. We discuss Walter Russell, we discuss Alice Bailey, we Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner, all kinds of topics that relate to manifestation in the 3D, the planes of existence. We also talk about biogeometry and Ibrahim Karim, Eileen McCusick, and tuning forks, because we believe, or we have found, that they all relate to each other in some way. They all speak about the ether. They speak about the different planes. Some may or may not be have cosmologies that relate to spirits or angels, but then others do. If they don't actually have that cosmology, they have a science that does believe that there is cosmic forces that do influence our world and our bodies, and that we have the ability to communicate and to access that energy. That's why I call myself the energy hunter, because I believe all things are energetic in nature, and they manifest in our 3D world through resonance and through vibration. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. This is Wilhelm Reich, part 4. We've been studying the book Cosmic Orgone Energy and Ether. That's the chapter that we're looking at today. The book is called God, the Devil, and Ether. And Wilhelm Reich, as many of you know or may not know, was the founder of what he called orgone energy, which came from the orgasm, from his background as a psychotherapist, and who worked with Freud and Jung in his early years, and then later had a 25-year clinical practice where he saw neuroses and things that he thought were brought on by people who had a guarded or a armor around their hearts and emotions and could not actually feel and let their hearts experience true ecstasy. And we're seeing some of that today, as some of us believe that we are now in the age of the heart and allowing our heart to actually feel and to govern our actions along with our minds, that our minds are really not the brain that Walter Russell talks about, is not the electric mind, but it is the knowing and sensing that comes from this intelligence that I call Akashic intelligence, which is really the intelligence and information field in the ether. So as we look at this, you know, I always do a little collage to get us into the move and the essence of what we're going to talk about today. So within this collage, we're going to talk about cosmic orgone energy and ether, form of existence, movement, visibility, change of form, lumination, potentiation, and hydrogen. And so when we look at these pictures, the first one I kind of want to look at is over here in the left-hand corner. This is the idea of potential energy. We see a big rock and we say, well, you know, how little energy would it take to make the whole potential of that force of that rock come down? So there's a lot of potential energy sitting there that with a little movement could put out a lot of force. So that's the idea of potentiation. How much potential energy is there in an object or area that we're looking at? Second diagram here is just the vortexes. Vortexes spinning. Now, we're going to talk about a little bit about Walter Russell's wave. We're going to talk a little bit about pulses, and we're going to talk about vortexes. And what is sometimes hard to understand is that when we see a wave, we see a two-dimensional picture. We think that's the way that the waves work. But that's really just a two-dimensional diagram, meaning it's just, you know, a flat diagram. There is no flat space in our 3D reality. We convert it to 2D so our minds can actually comprehend it in some manner, because we really can't see and experience the 3D in most aspects. So what this is, it's showing these whirling vortexes that are actually, you know, have this dimensional property of going in and going out. And we're going to talk a little bit about vortexes and how that relates to these theories of radiation and gravitation that Walter Russell talked about, but also what Wilhelm Reich speaks about. The other image I have down here is really the Fibonacci sequence. It's kind of an artistic view of it, but the Fibonacci sequence is the sequence in which we actually can form these vortexes. We call it the chambered nautilus. It's based on numbers and prime numbers and how it forms and how much power is in the sequence. And this is also kind of the sequence that Walter Russell talked about in terms of how we started off with primary gases or noble gases, and as they spun into existence, they became denser and denser into a 3D reality, and then went back out the other, continued on through their cycle and kept continuing, because from most of everybody that we study, everything in our existence is made from a prima substance. And that substance, it just goes through different forms. So as we have steam and we have ice and we have water, we have rocks, we have people, we have biological, and then we have gases, and we have air. Everything is the same. It's just in a different state of being along the wave cycle. So there is nothing that is inert, meaning even when we see something like a rock or a piece of steel, we think it's inert, but it is not. And it is constantly in a how long it takes to melt is the question, right? How long is it? Steel will eventually corrode over time. A rock will eventually erode over time. Our bodies will erode. Everything will erode. It's just how long will it take? And that's really kind of, so as we look at anything in our world, in our 3D reality, we have to realize that it is all in a constant state of change, which Walter Russell called the law of evolution. And when we talk about the law of evolution, we don't talk about Darwin and monkeys. We talk about that everything is in a constant change. There is nothing that is ever in stasis. It is in constant motion, which brings us to this picture, which is part of the movement, where we have these young gals that are dancing. They're constantly in a state of change. We have illumination, which we're going to talk about, illumination a bit. And we're going to talk a bit about motion and how motion and life go hand in hand. This diagram here is of the pentagram and the golden ratio. This is what some people would call sacred geometry. Each of these angles through biogeometry within this pentagram would have different resonance. Some people call those angels. They said that angles were actually, the term is where the term was then converted into angels, which would make some sense that each angel actually has a different personality type. As we know, is like Raphael's a healer and Gabriel has his own personality, and Ariel. When you study angelic realms and angelic beings, each one is different and puts out a different resonance, which would make sense that maybe they have a corresponding angle to that resonance, which is when we get into the work of Ibrahim Karim and biogeometry, we begin to look at form and how it resonates in the ether and what energetic and resonance it puts out. And there's also accompanying equations and so on for each of these types of angles. The last thing that we're looking at here is actually the hydrogen, a picture of what hydrogen is. They say it is. It's a blue light and white with these kind of wave-like mystic properties in it. So hydrogen is the root within Russell's cosmology. And it's really the kind of the seed of light. It's what life. It's what is the H2O, right? It's 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen, and all life without water that we know, at least biological life, is the root is water. Without water, there is no life. So these are some of the topics we're going to talk about today. Any questions on any of the diagrams before we move on to the actual discussion of the chapter? All right, let's go ahead and start back into Mr. Reich. So we're on chapter 6, which is Cosmic Orgone Energy and Ether. And we're just going to review a little bit from last week. We covered form of existence. We're going to review that, which was the living organism as the stronger energy system draws its energy from the lower energy level, orgonomic potential. And that's kind of where, remember that rock, we saw how we had that potential energy. This is valid not only for the organism as a whole, but for the nucleus in each living cell, which draws energy from the surrounding energetically lower protoplasm. So the idea is that the stronger would draw from the weaker. So if we were a weaker element in a stronger field, we may actually be drawn from rather than given to. So the idea is if we can, build our bodies into a stronger element, we can then actually not be as affected by fields that are outside of us, say like electromagnetics or magnetism or other things that might be detrimental to us, radiation and so on. But if we can get within a stronger field that may be available to us, like orgone or biogeometry, and create some fields, then we can actually hopefully empower our bodies to pull that in and to actually make us a little bit stronger to a certain capacity. So the next thing we're going to cover within Reich's work is movement. We just remember the picture of the gals dancing. The physical functions abstracted in orgone physics as orgone energy are always and everywhere in motion. Or expressed differently, moving to this date, it has been impossible to ascertain an orgonotic condition that with reference to another particular system could be defined as immobile or unchanging. A rock, which in the physical sense represents a certain material variation of the cosmic orgone energy, can be described as resting with reference to a second rock next to it. The orgone energy, however, which can be physically demonstrated in the rock, is never resting with regard to the same frame of reference. So, broken down, what this is saying is that, we often look at things and think that they're stable or they're not changing, but that's just because our perception of time. If you went into these, if you ever watch like the Time Machine, where people get into a machine and they go forward, and they see volcanoes come and go and lava flows come and go and so on and so forth. Everything's in a constant state of change, and I think that if we as humans can actually embrace that, because oftentimes we want to get to some area of stasis. We want to get to nirvana. We want to get to perfection. And we think that we can arrive at some destination where things are no longer going to change. But I believe myself that even as we think that we're going to go into a spiritual body, or our ascension maybe to a spiritual nature, that's still going to be a constant state of change once you get to that spiritual nature. It's not like we're going to get to a nirvanic state, where it's so much, bliss. It's going to be a different experience, but it's going to be a constant change. So some of I'm an architect, and at one time I had a large firm, and I'd always tell the new employees that came in, because they'd always get tired. People would come in and they'd design something, put all their effort into it, and the client would come and say, "I don't like that, change it." And they'd be like, "Oh, I can't change it." I said, "What you have to realize is your job is change. Once you can accept that your job is change, you're going to enjoy your job. You think your job is do and then be done, that you're always going to be unhappy, because life is constant change." And so I think that, we as humans, if we can embrace change and realize that we're in a cycle, then we begin to look around us and see change. We begin to see how things change. We embrace that change. And we realize that through change, we learn, we grow, and things can get better. But there's also that we can see change where things deteriorate. But this is the ideas of Walter Russell and the cycles. As I said earlier, Lu Song said, that those who live in cycles, that see the cycles rather than circles, are the ones that understand life. So as we begin to see the cycles, not circles, that this is constantly changing in cycles, just like the seasons, just like everything that is around us. This is the idea of the movement. Can the basic law of the conservation of energy, and at the very bottom, I have what the conservation of energy is. The law of conservation of energy states that energy can neither be created nor be destroyed, although it may be transformed from one form to another. So can the basic law of the conservation of energy be reconciled with the existence of orgonomic potential? It probably can. A first tentative suggestion to this effect is offered in the following assumption. While some orgone units are forming in the orgone ocean by concentrations, others terminate their single existence by energy dissipation into the orgone ocean. Again, this is what Walter Russell was speaking about with radiation and gravitation, that all things were spinning in their cycles of either concentration or disintegration. The concentration was the male aspects, the disintegration was the female aspect, but when we're talking about disintegration, we're talking about expanding, right? Expanding.
Balance.
Yeah.
The key, I think, is balance.
And that is what we will call the 0 point within Walter Russell's cosmic clock, and we're going to actually look at that a little bit more.
The balance is the 0 point?
Yes.
Excuse me, the balance point, like the
yes.
fulcrum.
Yes, correct. Very good, Doug. Thus, the energy lost by discharge or deaths of a number of the orgone units would be picked up again to be concentrated in other units. The running down of the universe towards random functions would in this way be counteracted by new bursts of high energy potentials due to reverse concentration, creation. The orgonomic reverse potential would make entropy unnecessary. So when we talk about entropy, we're talking about, say, the entropy of the body, the disintegration of the body, the loss of life, things that, are constantly in our world today. I mean, we actually live in a culture of death where it's accepted that all things die in entropy and go away. And what Reich is trying to express here, that if we could actually look maybe at how we could introduce orgone or creation and balance out the effects of disintegration, that entropy would be unnecessary. And there are some people out there who say that, that there is no reason why people should die, right? There's no reason why we should go through the cycles we go through. And, some express that it could be that the sin, right? This is when we get back to Christianity, is the sin nature is what killed us. But what is sin? It's missing the mark. It's our programming, right? We've been programmed that we do die, that we have these constraints upon us. And what Reich may say is that's what caused the armor around us, that we can't actually express or experience ecstasy here on Earth, because we've been so programmed that we can't do that and confined. So the idea that Reich's putting forward here is that can we actually introduce more orgone, more of this life potentiality force, more potential energy to our system to make entropy unnecessary? Any questions? Go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting you, but yeah, I was thinking that in general physics, where you have the law of thermodynamics, would you say that the orgonomic potential equates with the entropy in their way of looking at it? When energy is converted into entropy, and they believe it can never be reused, but this is basically the orgonomic potential.
Correct.
I think the law of that thermodynamics is failed. I think that it's not true.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, maybe even this next.
That's a bigger deal, though.
Yeah.
For me, I don't believe that they got it right. Just like they don't have the Einstein garbage.
Well, and the idea that once you get, last week we talked a lot about the idea that we got rid of the concept of ether, right? Which is energy, all around us, where everything's empty. Well, if energy is all around us,
they voted on this, in the science group. They actually voted on this stuff. Or, whether we should keep going with the Bible sort of, religion sort of thing. I think it's sort here, right? Last week.
A little bit, yes.
It's amazing, though.
Yeah, and so once you actually begin to bring the ether, once you invalidate the Michelson-Morley experiment that we talked about last week and say that, no, there's energy all around us that's accessible to us, and it's not empty space. And we're not like just the concentration of energy and around us empty, that we're actually in this fluid, magnetic fluid that,
without a doubt,
that we are being charged all that we can actually, participate in that energy if we know how to access it and keep our bodies and minds available to that energy. So that's kind of
we're learning. We
yes.
don't know what we're learning, but I believe we're learning.
Yes. And so orgone energy is basically of a dynamic metabolic nature. This would seem to be true for any kind of energy, since energy is a function of motion. You know, sometimes people ask me, like, they're in ill health and so on, and I like, can you move? You know, can you get out? Can you walk? You know, for me, that's really one of the best medicines you can have, is just to get out and move a bit. You can take all the supplements you want and sit on your couch, but it's not going to do you very well. If you can get out and actually walk, especially in nature, and breathe the air and hear the animals and see the water, best medicine you can have. And so what he's saying here is energy is the function of motion and vice versa. But classical physics speaks of potential energy, as for instance, that contained in water in a high basin. Nothing of the kind can be found in orgone energy. It never shows any condition that could be called static or immobile, except in its form of solid matter. It is this dynamic character of orgone energy that underlies the functionalism of all known orgone phenomena. This is true even for mechanical manifestations such as the sinus wave, which is a sine wave, or free fall. Therefore, movement, dynamics, functionalism, changeability constitute specific, inseparable qualities of the cosmic orgone energy. So, you know, what we're saying here is, you know, that movement, you know, that movement is life. And that, you know, not all movement, I mean, what Russell said was that you can't just see movement as being conscious life. So there's a difference here. There's conscious life and then there's life. You can animate an object without consciousness. I mean, there's a lot of people that walk around that are animated that don't have consciousness, right?
Humans, though, you said. I thought he meant bugs and stuff, though.
No, but he's talking about even humans. So what Walter was saying, Walter Russell was saying, is that just because you see something moving doesn't mean it's conscious, and in his view of what life is, right?
Or even moving.
Yeah. And so movement is life, though. Movement is what orgone. So we kind of have to, at this point, separate life from consciousness. So let's, you know, what Reich is really dealing with right now is just life itself.
Remember the thing where one of those, they said that our spleen gets white blood cells from the ether.
It could. I mean, I don't know.
I can't remember which one that was from, though. That's how. Oh, I know who. The guy that The Secret of Everything. He wrote that book. What's his name? He died like in 92.
Don't know.
I'll think of it.
Yeah, but it's like with the breatharian, right? I mean, they believe they can get, I think Barry even said you can get 90-some% of your nutrients from the air, which is really
whatchamacallit of a yogi.
Yeah,
he actually said he had a friend that was a breatharian all whole life.
And so, are you getting it from the air? Or are you getting it from the from the ether and the that's around us, right? I mean, this is where
I think it's just there.
Yeah, so air is just one.
This is not all real. We don't know what we are. This is just a movie.
Exactly. That's exactly what Walter says, right?
It's no question.
So let's continue with movement. So within the framework of this motility, we can, by means of observation and experiment, discern many different kinds of motion. So we're going to talk about the different forms of motions, and then we're going to get a little bit into those structures of those motions. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the wavy motion that we talked about, right? He called it the sinus wave. Maybe it's a sine wave. You can see wavy rhythmic motion over smooth water surfaces of mountain lakes and in the sky. This motility too is not uniform, but varies continuously, right? It's not just a very, arithmetically constant where you just see the circles as perfect circles the whole way. They vary, the waves vary. There are no two parts of the surface of a lake that would have an equal motion at one and the same time. In addition, the wavy motion shows different rhythms. We're getting back to rhythms and resonance at different times. The oscillations constantly embrace different areas. We search in vain for mechanically uniform static motion or condition. There is nothing within the realm of primal organotic functions that would appear as mechanical repetition. There seems to exist no law at all except the one of B, pulsation. All wavy motion of primordial orgone energy pulsates. So now we're talking about the different movements. So the first one was wavy motion. The other one is pulse. So we're talking, this is almost like talking about wave theory versus particle theory, right? You got this pulse going on, this, this thing happening. We're going to get a little bit more into pulse and so on. So we have these two different concepts of motion occurring. We have the wave and we have the pulsation. So energy pulsates. It is necessary to distinguish the wavy form of orgone motion from its pulsation. The pulsation differs from the wavy motion in that, one, pulsation consists of alternatingly expanding and contracting movements. So here we're talking about the heart, we're talking about the breath, we're talking about pulsation, which is not the wavy sign function. While the wave is steady, progression of wave crests and troughs. And we're going to talk a little bit about crests and troughs within the waves and within biogeometry, within the idea of the physics of quality. In pulsation, the medium, the water in the lake, seems to move from a certain center in all directions to and fro, while in waves, the water swings up and down, thus making the crests and the troughs of the progressing waves that run over the water's surface. So as we're talking about, so as a wave comes up to its peak, that would be the crest. As it moves down to the bottom, that would be its trough. So that would be the amplitude of the wave. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So a wave would have amplitude and it would have wavelength, right? So how long does it take from crest to trough? And then what is that verticality and how high is it going? The pulsatory motion of the lake surface moves slowly from west to east or not at all, while the waves run much faster in the same direction. Pulsation is an essentially discontinuous process, while wave motion is a continuous process. So what it's saying here is that waves usually have some regular form to it. It's kind of up and down. It stays within a constant, to where pulsation can be erratic. Even our heartbeat can be erratic. Things can be erratic. But the wave motion has a time and a sequence to it that it has this wave and trough and this time length or length that is somewhat constant. Pulsation is a function in 3 dimensions of space, as manifested in the sphere-shaped propagation of radio signals. Waves, on the other hand, are, if examined singularly, 2-dimensional functions defined by wavelength and frequency only. So what we're saying here is that we have what some people would call disturbances in the ether. One would call them waves that are happening, which are really how the ether is interacting with the energy that is worked upon it within its the motion that was and then you have a pulse that's acting intermittently on the ether also and creating a different energy pattern. This is what Reich is saying. So let's
adding new ones in, or just getting more? I mean, is it finding new ones, or how is it getting these extra ones?
Well, again, there's thousands of reasons why things are beginning to pulse, and it could be a new life form,
so
right?
There's no single thing.
Yeah, there's no single thing. It's there's all kinds of pulsations that are happening, and and so right now we're going to take a little trip, back to Walter Russell, because he actually showing some of the diagrams.
One thing though, before and I'll shut up, is it's idea that the single atom, that there can't be anything smaller, that's the end, doesn't split or anything else. I mean,
I don't know if
that they even think they proved any of this nonsense.
Yeah, exactly.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, because there is, again, the idea of an atom is, again, just a point on the wave. It's just a point at what point, because then the atom,
all the nonsense they make out of it.
Yeah, and to understand that you know, that these forms that we're making are just in different phases of concentration or radiation, right? So as they become more concentrated, an atom makes up a molecule that makes up a cell, that makes up a tissue, that makes up an organ.
It's like a gooey example of something that can also be in math.
Exactly.
That's how I see it.
Yeah,
Instead of 86 with all kinds of hyphens, it's a little picture.
Exactly. And this is why I was talking about the rock and the human, that the ether and the idea of what's made in matter is just a different state of the same element. And it's in this constant flux and flow based on these ideas of radiation and gravitation of the vortex and the wave and the pulse. And, Walter Russell talked a lot about this, where he had the idea of these vortexes that, are spinning. One is spinning into, a cone, a downward shaped cone, the other one's into an upward shaped cone, with the highest point of potentiation at the point. But once it gets to the point, it begins to reverse back out to the outer edge, which has the lowest area of potentiation because it is the most diverse. So you're taking the same energy and expanding it over a larger period. Therefore, you have the lowest point of potentiation on the outside. So, these are all Russellian diagrams. We talked here about the law, about the cosmic clock with inhalation and exhalation, which is, again, the breath in a sense with the heartbeat.
But it's all right, though, isn't it? Science could not say some of this was not a fact, could they?
Well, they have. I mean, again, it's
what they do and what they,
Yeah. They would, I don't think that they would say that, they're basically Newtonian. And what Newton, as we've talked earlier, is that Newton only saw one half of the wave, right? He saw the apple fall, he didn't see it disintegrate and go back up. It was
90% water, which went back in the atmosphere.
Exactly. And so, they don't see the cycle.
I think they do see it. I'm trying to say that they're doing it same as they do everything. Secret is in plain sight.
Yeah, exactly. But they want to teach.
But the secret's what, that is not, we don't know yet. We're trying to figure out the exact secret.
Exactly. And we're beginning to but I believe that it's the work that is done once you begin to understand, as I think you're aware of too, is that the more that we begin to see this, the more that we begin to see it around us.
But we have to start, everything has to start. So, whatever level you're in, it's at least you're moving forward.
Exactly. And so I think that as we become more aware and we begin to see these, I know that I see it, the more that I begin to understand this work and begin to look around me and see things happening, I can begin to understand more, which opens up new avenues within me, within how I see things and how I understand things.
I've noticed for decades, just didn't have a name for it.
And
for decades, for sure. But everything was, not this, but there's something else.
But, this was talked
here.
This was talked about, long ago, right? I mean, we're talking, at least from the history that we have, from Platonics and, Plato and Aristotle, it was kind of lost. And, I mean, this new science that we have is really only about, 122 years old, right? I mean, it started in the 1900s, the science that we're talking about right now. From the
like homeopathy is around that time, 1865 or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right around the Civil War. I mean, basically was where a lot of this new science came in. I mean, before then, I mean, you have to realize that, okay, me as an architect, I started, for an architect out of high school in 1979, and I was drawn by hand on paper. That's the way the Egyptians did it, right?
Me too. I mean,
that's how much the world's changed in just my lifetime. Is that now everything's on computer and no one draws anymore?
Unbelievable. Yes, the paper, what you signed, was everything.
Yes. So, the idea of this new science that everyone's a believer in is so young and untested. And,
it's propaganda.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing here with the waves and the cycles is that what Walter Russell talked about, this cosmic pendulum with, the inhalation, the exhalation, the 0 point, right? And, how this, how the spiral, the Fibonacci sequence turned into these types of things where we have hydrogen at the front, and as we moved out, we got into the other denser, elements. This is all part, we see this in 2D, but this is all actually happening in this 3D vortex.
Yeah, we're looking at the little pieces holding it together, but we're not going to the real action where it's focused.
Yeah, exactly. And as we look at this right here, right, this is just a colored of this sinus wave or the sine wave that Reich was talking about, but along it also is the manifestation of all the gases and so on as the wave, has greater and greater potentiation and moves along within its cycle. But again, this is only really showing one side of the cycle. This cycle will return back, right, back into space where it came from, and back to its origins. So within this, we have these, hopefully these diagrams kind of help a little bit in explaining what Reich is talking about and how they relate back into Russell's work. So here's the law, right? In any wave, the inductive current seeks the high pressure at the apex, right, which this is the apex, of its cone of energy, and the conductive current seeks the low pressure at its base. So it's lower pressure here, it's higher pressure here. So the highest potentiation is here, the lowest would be at its base as these things spin together. And we have the positive and the negative, right? So these are all Russellian concepts that, I don't know if, Reich embraced Russell, but he had very much the same concepts within his science that he was propagating within the orgone cosmology. Any questions?
This is all Russellian what I'm looking at in front of me right now?
Yeah, these are all Russell diagrams. Okay.
I was thinking of the stones, that potential. Is that why you would see sometimes people put rocks in a certain formation around a tree or something?
Well, that actually...
Is that to create the field? Is it to create...
Well, that's really more of like within a biogeometry, which is the number and the resonance. So again, it's back to the idea of the antennas. So as we put into certain numbers and sequence and form, this is biogeometry, this is sacred geometry, that we would...
I don't think that she's talking about something that they numbered and counted.
Yes, well...
Is that what she means?
Well, usually that's why they do the stones in certain...
You mean now or future? Past? I mean past.
I'm just talking about the use of stones. Like if you walk around and, you walk in ancient cities or you look in circles and in a field, yeah, you might see this, I'm just, and there's some traditions that they're using that. So I'm just thinking about, all the rocks, certain rocks, and because you talked at the beginning of the potentiality. So I was wondering if it helps with, either with conservation or,
Well, it does. I mean, and again, when you start, so like when I look at a stone circle now, I look at the number of the rocks, right? I look at how many there are. I actually look at the ratio. If there's like concentric circles, what's the ratio of the inner to the outer circle? If there's angles between the rocks, what are those angles? What are the stones made of? Did they actually try to bring in a resonance from a certain type of stone or rock? Because each one, what's the color? Within biogeometry, they actually paint the rocks, right? Different colors to bring in the resonance and frequency of color along with the number and so on. So there's so many aspects that when you actually look like say a medicine wheel that the Indians used to make on the ground out of stones, how much was really going on there with sacred geometry, angle, number, and so on, and ratio in terms of what was being accomplished to bring in that vortex to help maybe concentrate and actually create a sacred power spot out of that potential energy within the stones.
It can't be stopped. I mean, it's woken up and it's not going to stop.
I agree. Okay, so now we're going to get back into movement a little bit, and we're actually going to talk about these waves. These are all Reich's work. These are from the book itself, from the pages in the book. So if we follow the path of certain wave crests or wave troughs through, we obtain a continuous line. The waveform itself is a continuous line. However, following the position of extreme expansion or contraction is the pulsation function. We obtain points and not a line. Through observation of the motion of atmospheric orgone at mountaintops, we can clearly discern pulses and waves. The pulsatory peaks are superimposed on the course of the waves in the following manner. So as we look at this diagram that is from Reich, we see the wave, the sinus wave, or the sine wave as we called it, which is also within the Russellian. And we see that here W is the wave, a P is the pulse that he's showing that is occurring at what we would call the WC, which is the wave crest and the wave trough. So from the top of the wave crest to the bottom is what we call the amplitude of the wave. What he's not really showing here is that from this point to this point, right, is the wave duration or wave length. What Abraham Karim talked about within his physics of quality was it was very important as to what this angle of the wave was. So from, say from this point here, from wave crest to wave trough, based on the length of the wave also, that creates a triangle. That triangle then would create an angle here. And whether or not this angle was within the golden ratio or golden mean or within some other beneficial angle could actually determine whether or not that wave form was beneficial or detrimental based on the wavelength and its amplitude and the angle that was created. So this is a schematic presentation of the difference between the pulses which occur. And see, some pulses occur at wave trough and crest and others do not. They occur within the. So my attention was first called, this is Reich talking, my attention was first called to this basic difference between P and W, which is pulse and wave. In 1935, when I measured and photographed bioenergy at skin surface. So one thing that Reich did was he photographed and picked up these different pulsations on film, specialized film for the different waves. It was not until 1948 that I understood the interrelation between pulses and waves in the organotic system. This was made possible by utilizing organotic pulses in setting a spinner type of motor into rotary motion. In the original observation, the pulses P were superimposed on the wavy motion of the Cosmic Orgone Energy like mountain peaks on a mountain range. Whereas the mechanism of a radio transmitter, the pulsatory signals are, according to the theory, transformed into waves synchronically. The pulse of the heartbeat are not synchronized with the rhythm of the orgone waves. The pulses are distributed regularly while the waves are in a state of constant change. This is true for the living organism as depicted in the sketch to the right. It also seems to be true for the motion of the atmosphere orgone. So what he's saying here is that when he's looking at a mechanically designed wave, which we would call, these EMF waves or any of our radio signals or or microwave signals, the pulse and the wave correspond, synchronistically to wave and trough. When we look at a natural organism, he's saying that he's seen the pulse and the wave as asynchronous, meaning that they're occurring at different times, which is then producing a different energy form. And again, that's within this diagram here where we're seeing these pulses and this wave vary in length and structure, but also within these pulses are varying where they occur on the wave. So this is what he's saying is this difference between the organic pulse and wave versus the mechanistic type of wave, which is detrimental to the human form. So he's seeing that these are the differences between an orgone type of wave and a mechanical type of wave. Any questions on these waveforms before we move on?
Yeah, I was wondering if the angle of this wave path that you mentioned, that was important, is it not just a function of frequency?
Well, within, like, say, when you do a scalar, not scalar, a Rife machine,
mm-hmm.
you can attach a frequency to a waveform, and the waveform is actually the carrier which the frequency rides upon. So the waveform structure can vary with and carry a separate frequency. So
okay.
the wave, if you understand what I'm saying.
Through resonance?
Through resonance, I think the waveform is created. I just know that when I would do the Rife machines, I could choose a waveform and then they could put a frequency on the carrier wave. So the wave was being generated and the frequency could be carried on the wave. So I don't know if it's always a function of because like when you say like frequency, like you can have a digital wave, right? But that can be multiple frequencies.
Yeah, but you're now speaking of waveform as in the shape of the wave, like a sawtooth or
exactly.
Yeah, but I was more thinking like, okay, but if you have ups and downs and the angle is of importance qualitatively,
yes.
that angle is being determined by the frequency, because
Correct.
the higher the frequency, the steeper the angle will be.
Yes, but the form kind of stays the same, but how, so it's either like a sine wave or, like you said, a spike wave or a block wave, right? But yeah, but the trough and the amplitude is determined by the frequency.
Okay.
But the form stays the same. So either, if you have like a sine wave versus a spike wave, that is by how it's actually generated. Like an analog wave versus a digital wave have different forms.
Okay. Well, I will just let this simmer.
Okay. But you're correct. I believe that like you said, the frequency does determine that length and amplitude, right? Which then would cause that. So a different frequency would have different effects based on that ratio of length to height.
Okay, thanks.
From now on, we shall designate the symbol P for pulse and the symbol W for waves. These distinctly separate function, and the one basic function of pulsation P will later be studied thoroughly in certain orgonomic functions. They express a most important relationship between discontinuous P, pulses, and continuous W, waves, functions of nature. We shall have to find out what extent these functions are related to Planck's quanta, discontinuum, and to classical wave mechanics, continuum. As a preliminary measure, we may try to coordinate P, pulse, with W and P functionally in the following manner. So we have a diagram here which shows the pulsation coming in and then splitting into pulses of impulses and then waves into waveforms. So this is what Reich is saying, how we have these pulses that come in and then they split into pulses and waves. Thus, pulsation would constitute the common functioning principle of both pulse and wave. So pulsation, not pulse itself, but pulsation would constitute the common functioning principle of both pulses and waves. The two varied functions of pulsation. It will require elaborate functional deduction to derive the energy formula of orgonomic primal pulsation from relevant cosmic functions. They will be given in a different context. So within Reich's theory, he's saying that everything starts with pulsation and then splits into pulse and wave. So it would start with a pulsation and then become, so a pulsation would generate this, and then that would be broken up into pulse and wave. So the west-east movement of the atmospheric orgone envelope. So now we're talking about, as we look in the sky, and we're talking about the atmospheric orgone, as we look at a map, say, of a storm circling or how that would be working. This west-east movement of the atmospheric orgone envelope, the west-east direction in the motion of the atmospheric orgone energy, has great significance independent of the special variations that appear in the wave. motion and in the pulses. The west-east direction is in agreement with the direction of rotation of the Earth's sphere. Unfortunately for flat earthers, he is talking about a sphere. Thus, it is also in agreement with the general direction of rotation in the planetary system. A reversal of this generally valid direction on the Earth's surface takes place only before thunderstorms or heavy rain occurring to the west of the observer. So what Reich is saying here, that we can actually see a change in the structure, in the pulsation, in the wave motion, when it only takes place before thunderstorms or heavy rain occurring to the west of the observer. So the following diagram, this is the diagram that we see over here, illustrates the reversal of direction in the movement of the orgone energy envelope. So if you see ES here is the Earth's sphere. So he's saying that this is the Earth, right? This reversal can be explained without contradiction by the attraction exerted upon the freely moving orgone energy at R. So we have freely moving energy at R here by the by the highly concentrated orgone in the clouds to the west. So we have the clouds to the west over here. Clouds to the west of the thundercloud. No reversal will take place since the attraction will act in the same direction the general motion of the orgone envelope. It is hard to state definitely whether or not the strong west easterly wind, which often arises after the clearing of the sky, after the return of the west-east direction of orgone motion, is a consequence of the filling of the gap. So this filling of this gap between these two, whether or not that can be attributed to the motion that is going on in the sky. So if we look at this diagram, he's saying here's the Earth sphere, here's the west, here's the east. So within this idea of orgone, the idea of direction, which was also very pertinent and part of Russell's theories in terms of north, south, east, and west, in which east and west was where we got if you guys remember the oblation, which was where it kind of came out. It came in through the top and bottom and went out to the east and west. And what he's saying here is that this is where we're seeing this orgone. So we have the thunder clouds over here because we're going to get this reversal to fill this gap. And this is the thinning of the orgone envelope. So this is kind of his description of how this reversal can be explained, where we have these thunderstorms and rain within the orgone envelope of the atmosphere of the Earth. Any questions regarding what he's discussing here? I know it's a concept that's a little bit difficult to understand. So again, we have.
When I'm looking at this, so is he trying to explain what happens? He says in here when there's like a storm or something. Exactly. Because obviously, so when I travel, like I travel from west to east, if I look at this thing that you're showing here, you've got the west and east reversed, right? So just saying, like it's so he's trying to explain something else here.
What he's trying to explain is that, yeah, so the west is on this side, the east is on this side. What he's trying to say is that this west east
because there's an envelope, this envelope thing.
Exactly. This is the atmosphere out here,
right? And
so what he's trying to explain is that as we have this west to east, this is the natural the west east direction is agreeing with the direction of the rotation of the Earth. Okay. Right. So the Earth, so as we look at it as going this way, right? The rotation of the Earth upon the axis, right? So that's an agreement. A reversal of this generally valid direction of the Earth's surface takes place only before thunderstorms. So I think what we're looking at, right? So we're looking at this actually from the top down. Okay. Not from the side. And,
okay.
and so as the Earth begins to rotate in this direction, right, that we see this reversal take place, and then it begins to fill that area.
So would we see this if we were standing outside and we, you know, when there's a big wind, we can look at this, we would look at the
clouds.
The clouds. That's what I'm talking about. I was going to say the clouds. Yeah. We don't look enough above us and around us to see things, you know. It's a lot of observation, eh?
Yeah, and you know, and we mostly live in buildings, and we still have. And you know, he's talking about from a mountaintop, right? So you get.
I know. On top of that, so if we imagine ourselves at the mountaintop, okay,
and so we don't down at this. Yeah, we don't have. So we have a much, you know, clearer view of the sky.
Right.
Then we may see this occur. Now I haven't, you know, done this myself. I'm just saying, but this is, you know, we can, you know, as a group, we can begin to, because as we have winter coming into effect here, right, we begin to see if this is really what we see occurring. But this is what he's saying. So he's talking about this orgone, and this is, you know, when we listen.
The guy got killed, right? He got killed by NASA.
He got killed by somebody. I don't know who killed him, but yes, he died in prison of, you know, suicide, which no one said he was suicidal, but that's how they said he died.
I mean, so that alone gets him into the club, though, is what I'm getting.
Exactly. So the idea is that he's talking about here, and this is, you know, I'm gonna bring up a point here, but just remember that we're talking about the atmosphere right now, right? Orgone in the atmosphere, and what is happening with that orgone. So let's talk a little bit here about the visibility. So what he just was talking about orgone and how that affected within the atmosphere, right? Within the cloud structure, within what he's seeing. So now he's going to talk a little bit about the visibility of orgone, right? Because he's saying he's seeing this in the sky. He's seeing this orgone kind of thing happening in the sky. Now we're going to talk about visibility in the dark. So a room of at least 6 square feet. So if you have a room, this is what he was called his orgone accumulator, his little boxes he made, right? Which had wood on the outside, sheet metal on the inside, and were totally dark inside, no light inside. So a room of at least 6 square feet, made completely light tight and lined with sheet metal on the inside, is required to observe the orgone energy phenomenon in the dark. After about 15 to 30 minutes adaptation, the room appears bluish gray and not black. Slow-moving fog-like formations are clearly discernible. The longer we sit in the dark metal room, the more distinct the light phenomenon becomes. After some time, bluish violet, strongly illuminating light points appear. So what he's saying is that as he sits in this box, he begins actually to see this orgone appearing. This bluish, kind of grayish, and then into a bluish violet. Later, when our organism has excited, so he's saying that once he's in this box and our physical form itself, the organism ourself, begins to interact with this orgone that is being generated within inside the box, and it begins to excite the orgone energy in the room to a sufficient extent, a concentration sets in the foggy formation, rapid yellowish white light, lightning-like streaks of light, strahan, cross the room in all directions. We can magnify these whitish rays by observing them against an opaque plastic screen with a magnifying glass. For a more detailed description of darkroom phenomena, I refer the reader to chapter 4 of my book, The Discovery of the Orgone, the Cancer Biopathy. So this is an experiment that I'm going to try to perform, actually, to create a orgone box, a light tight orgone box, and see if I can actually, you know, detect this bluish light, which is, you know, this reminds me of the sky, right? I mean, you're seeing this bluish sky, you're beginning to see these foggy cloud form. It's almost like we're actually creating the atmosphere with inside the box. And then you can see like this lightning happening as you have the excitation of the orgone with the body. And one thing that I'm, as I talk about what orgone looks like, I can't help but think, on the collage that we look at hydrogen as a bluish light, right? And I'm beginning to think, is orgone a form of hydrogen? Is that really what we're looking at as this primary source of the body that actually helps us heal? Is that really what we're talking about? Are we actually getting down to the formation of hydrogen within these orgone accumulators? And is that what we're shooting in the sky when we do the cloud busters and everything? Are we actually just shooting like hydrogen frequency into the skies? That is actually having the effects that we're talking about. So what he's trying to get at here is that you can actually see this occurring, that you can actually see, and he's associating the lights he's seeing, the colors he's seeing with this orgone function. So the change of form. In 1939, when I first discovered and observed the orgone illumination in the darkroom, I believe that orgone energy consisted of 3 distinct forms: bluish gray, fog-like formations, deeply blue violet illuminating dots, and whitish rapid rays. Since then, these 3 forms have been found not to be distinct types of orgone energy, but 3 forms of one and the same energy under different conditions. Orgone energy changes from the fog-like to the ray-like condition when it is excited or irritated. Such excitation can be stimulated by metallic substances. So this is where we do like the cloud busters, and we use the metal, right? The metal pipes, or when we put this metal inside the orgone accumulators. So metal does not hold or absorb orgone energy, but reflects it rapidly, thus constituting an obstacle in such a mechanics term. It is applicable to all the realm of orgone functions, i.e. ether functions. So within this brief description he's putting forth here, there's a lot of discussion of, do you need to use copper? Do you need to use, now copper has less resistance, is more conductive. Like that's why we use it for wires than is, aluminum or metal. But from what he's saying here, any substance, any metallic substance will work to have this excitation. He also says that the excitation is caused by living organisms in the metal enclosed darkroom. The organistic orgone energy apparently excites the atmosphere orgone energy and vice versa. So if you have a metal object, if you have a living object within this box, you're going to excite the orgone, which is going to give you these. And then he says electromagnetic discontinuous field action, an induction coil system, will speed up the change from the fog-like to the ray-like formation quite considerably in 20 minutes to the customary 1 to 2 hours. So if you build a orgone accumulator, you sit in it, you begin to see the blue light, you being in there will excite it, but if you bring in some type of coil, electromagnetic coil, it will actually make it go faster. So every type of condition and form is mobile, dynamic, different in speed, and never static or mechanical. So I kind of just found this picture kind of like, what orgone may look like, right? With this bluish violet with these streaks going through it and these dots, just to kind of give an idea what you may see as you begin to see the orgone. So illumination. The visibility of orgone energy in the darkroom is obviously due to the function of illumination. Orgone energy emits or develops light. So, the idea of what light is and what we see and what we experience. And kind of what he's saying is that, we have the ether. So the ether's in the box with us, right? Because the ether surrounds us, is everywhere. We begin to, concentrate this ether within this box. We begin then to put this metal and living form in there that excites it, and we get these different ideas, and we get this bluish gray, right? So, and then we begin to see it. It begins to illuminate. So within a dark space, we begin to see this bluish tint. And so it develops this light, or expressed differently, it functions in such a manner that our visual sense perceive light, it illuminates. This organotic illumination, no matter under what condition it may occur, is the most cases of a bluish grayish, bluish green, or bluish violet color. Again, it reminds me of hydrogen. You know, this is the idea of the blue, you know, the water, everything that we see with the sky, the hydrogen, the ideas of this with water. This distinguishes orgone illumination from other types of illumination, such as that of gases. Neon gas illuminates red, argon white, helium green. Organotic illumination in a vacuum is distinctly bluish violet, and it produces a blue reaction on color film. The illumination is strongest when there is an exciting contact between two orgone energy fields, or between an orgone energy field and an electromagnetic field. Organotic illumination is cold. No heat develops. As for instance, in the passage of electricity through thin wire, or as in chemical combustion. Atmospheric conditions such as sheet lightning over wide areas of sky, the wavy aurora borealis, and the bluish St. Elmo's fire, together with the soft glow of glowworms and the bluish illumination of wood that has disintegrated bionously, are examples of cold illumination functions of orgone energy. Microscopically, organotic illumination in living cells and in bionous matter can be observed in the strong reflection of light. Strongly charged earth bions or red blood cells show a strong illuminating aura around the membrane. When these cells weaken and lose their orgone charge, this aura or energy field disappears. So he's really correlating this idea of illumination, you know, how bright we are, right? How much of a light being we are, with our light function and with our ability to hold and maintain organotic energy. And that over time, as we lose that brightness, as we lose that light, we also lose life function.
When I was reading that, it made me think about our energy body and their auras, and how that correlates, and whether he was observing that in his books.
Well, again, you know, he was very much a strict scientist in a sense, right? So he wasn't much of like an aura guy. I mean, he talks about cosmic orgone, and you know, but he doesn't really talk about auras. He's kind of like, you know, I'm seeing this in the box, right? I'm seeing this bluish, you know, and I'm seeing.
Yeah, he's also, the first sentence is interesting. The visibility of orgone energy in the darkroom is obviously, he assumes that's a function of illumination. Well, from my experience, anything that we become aware of that doesn't come in through our regular senses, our brain starts to interpret it, and that can show up as colors or as feeling sensations or whatever. So, but he's not considering that option, I think.
Yeah, and you know, and that's one thing, like I said, when you actually read his history and so on, he was such a strict scientist, which really may have came from his, you know, indoctrination with Freud, who was very much a strict scientist also, and an atheist in a sense, right? I mean, no spirituality. That he interprets things purely in a scientific way, and the idea of what is illumination, right? What actually is illumination? What is light? You know, why do we see it? Because there's many factors that once you go into a dark space, you know, and you become almost like into a deprivation tank, you know, what are your senses and what are you going to see at that point? You know, there's a lot of, you know, he's not really taking into the observer what is happening to the observer in this box also. So I would like to, you know, like I said, I'd love to perform this experiment to see if I could actually see this bluish light, you know, and if I could excite it with this pulsation of a coil. That'd be, I think, really cool, to mimic this experiment to see if it actually works.
Yeah, it's also though that when somehow we can connect, and that when someone is in your zone and you believe this, that then they have the opportunity to believe it as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's where we need to get to, though. But that would help us.
Exactly. It's what they were talking about yesterday in the Alpha Cast, right? Kind of the collective dream, right? The collective mind that we get into, where we all begin to create together and create that which we want. And, you know, even for me, like now that I've read this, when I go in the box, I'm going to be looking for a blue light, right? That's what I'm going to be looking for, because I've already been indoctrinated into what I'm going to see.
Yeah. Well, when I was when I was in groups meditating, see, we have different vehicle. Like all of us are made up of, well, we're not at the same point, and there are people that are born in a certain way where, yeah, like when they're meditating, they're going to see colors, shapes, spirals. I'm not kidding. But personally, I don't. But it doesn't mean I'm not. I can sense it in a different way. Like you can sense it, but you can't see it. It's just it's just how it comes into your body. So the bluish light, I can see it. When I try to reach up, like I see a bluish light, and it's like the exit point in the chakra up there, in the crown chakra. So it'd be interesting. And then eventually you might see some light, but I'm just saying bluish seems to be like a pattern, okay, of the universe, if you like. And you can think of the Buddhic plane as where it's blue. So we'll see what we find out from there. I mean, should be interesting. You going in that box is one thing, but try to put somebody who's got like a body that sees lots of colors.
Exactly.
You wonder what they would see. Just me.
Well, like I said, it's not very expensive. This is a pretty cheap experiment to do, just to build.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A little, 6 square foot box that you get in. I mean, it's not that big a deal to actually see if it works.
Yes, it's nothing.
But depending upon where your head's at, you might make up something different.
Exactly. And what your health is too. Because he said that, that people that were ill that went in these, it took a lot longer for them to actually manifest because their orgonomic energy system was so low. And that was a direct correlation of how fast this phenomenon occurred.
But they were going in those boxes also to get better, isn't it?
That's what I'm saying, but they were going in ill, so they were.
Yeah, I'm just saying it was building up their energy.
Yeah. And that's he said he actually cured cancer, right, by having people go into these boxes and cured other ailments.
Mercury, no?
No, he just did it with this orgone. I mean, this is by going in the box and sitting in the box. It's called the orgone acumen. And again, he made that, as we talked about maybe a couple of times ago, about the little box that they huffed on, right? They breathed in, which reminds me of when I used my Brown's gas machine here, right? Breathing in the hydrogen. So
you do it at night. Do you put a canola on?
I do it. I do it 3 times a day. I do it 20 minutes 3 times a day for an hour a day, and then you drink the water too. You take the water that you produce and you drink the water.
Would you think of doing it from overnight instead of during the day? Is all I'm asking. Wearing the canola while you're sleeping, so you're getting it for 8 hours.
Well, they don't recommend 8 hours. They recommend they only recommend an hour a day.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure
you said you can lower the like the amount or something.
You can. I mean, there's an adjustment where they only have you put in 40% if you're like a man and 36% if you're a woman, but you can take it up to 100% because you can take there's other attachments, like you can put it in like a foot bath, and you can soak your feet in there and you can put it on scars. They say scars will go away, different areas of your body. You can actually blow the hydrogen gas on and to help heal and cure other areas of your body.
Well, it's like water. It sounds like to me. Right?
Yeah. Well, again, I think to me, it's almost like we're spraying orgone, right? It's kind of like a little orgone accumulator in itself. I think that whatever it does have healing properties for sure. So let's move on to the heat production about orgone. So, we're talking about this being cold, right? So usually we need heat to have illumination or something. You're saying this is a cold process. So whereas organotic illumination is cold, other functions of orgone energy are accompanied by a more or less marked rise in temperature. So the heat level of living organisms is usually higher than the temperature of the surrounding air. And the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere is constantly higher than the much lower temperature of surrounding space. At the Orgone accumulator, a constant temperature difference of T0 minus T is maintained between the air directly above the accumulator and the air surrounding it. These differences vary on the average of 0.3 to 1.5 Celsius. In closed rooms and open air, they often reach high values such as 15 to 20 Celsius in the sun. This temperature difference is apparently due to heat developed by the reflecting or stopping of the kinetic energy of the orgone energy motion of the metal walls. Removal of the inner metal walls reduces the difference to zero. So what he's saying here is that because this metal of these boxes, as the heat comes in, it can create heat, unlike the coolness of the light that is being generated, that the box itself can create heat. And then the last thing we're going to talk about here is static electricity. Static electricity is a specific function of the atmospheric orgone energy. Paradoxically, the theory of electricity assumes that the atmosphere is both free of electrical charge and full of static charge, static being an electrical nature. Sheet lightning and thunderstorm lightning have remained unexplained. Orgonomy demonstrates the charges in the atmosphere by means of the spontaneous electroscopic discharge, the so-called natural leak in classical physics. This discharge is more rapid and less concentrated orgonotic atmosphere and slower in a more highly concentrated one. It is furthermore slower at noon than in the early morning and evening. This fact contradicts the ionization theory. So what he's saying here is that orgone has its very distinct properties, that it illuminates. It's a bluish color. It has different properties as it becomes excited either by metal or by organic organisms or by electromagnetism. And this can all, from what Reich says, be shown and proven in the orgone accumulator. So this is what, when Reich was found dead or murdered, they went and they destroyed all these orgone accumulators because they were dangerous, I guess. A metal box is dangerous, even though this is basically what every restaurant and convenience store has in it, as an ice box. But they, for some reason, they were seemed to be deemed very dangerous. So this is a brief description from the book regarding how he saw wave function and pulsation, how he saw the way to capture and produce orgone that could be beneficial to the body, and to explain it through Russellian waveform, as we've talked about, with the constant motion, that nothing is static in life, that everything is in constant motion, and that we are surrounded by the ether and there is no vacuum. So any questions? This will end it for today. Any questions or comments on what we discussed? All right. Nobody? Not one question, comment? All righty. So with that, we will go ahead and close out. This is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI. And with the Secret of Light group, thank you all again for joining and discussing and looking into Wilhelm Reich and orgone. Please like and subscribe. There's other videos that we've done on Russell and Steiner and all types of topics that we've discussed, Alice Bailey and white magic. And please leave comments as to what you'd like to hear and what you'd like to see. And if you disagree or agree, we'd like to hear your opinion. So thanks again. And we will see you all next week with finishing up this chapter on Cosmic Orgone Energy and Ether, chapter 4. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Will.
Okay.